All right, welcome friends, and here we are with another one in our video series. We're here to talk to Dr. Chris Jackson, who is the Technical Director for Subsurface Storage at WSP. He's over there in the UK, and we're happy to have his time today and get to talk to him a little bit about his background, how he came into geology, what he's been doing in his career, and we'll maybe even loop around at the end here and talk about something we both share a passion for, and that's rock climbing. So thanks so much, Chris, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, Shawn. I was going to say rock climbing's, I'm trying to work out whether work is easier or rock climbing is easier, or which one's more difficult, I'm not sure.
Depends on the day, I'm sure,
Depends
right?
how you do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
Well, this is great. I appreciate you taking time today. I know you have a busy schedule. So maybe if you could just maybe start out by explaining a little about where you grew up, how you got into science and geology, kind of what that pathway looked like in your early years.
Yeah, so I grew up in a place called Derby in the centre of the UK. Um, and I guess I wasn't really surrounded by geology on my immediate doorstep where I grew up, but my parents, strangely, were very avid caravanners and campers.
Huh.
So growing up, we spent quite a lot of time caravanning and camping in the Peak District, so in the kind of hill ranges north of where I grew up. And I can't really claim that that was a formative experience in that the first moment I went in a tent and came out of it and saw the mountains, I wanted to be a geologist. It's not as romantic as that,
Yeah.
but maybe there was elements of being outdoors and sort of exploring landscapes that when I eventually kind of found geology as a kind of formal, subject, that was in my memory. So I was always kind of an outdoorsy sort of kid. So being exposed to that was kind of useful when I was growing up.
Yeah, and I think that's a common denominator with a lot of geologists is they have a lot of them have like an outdoor background, or they're kind of raised in that kind of outdoor setting, and that kind of I think plants the seeds for starting to look around and wondering how it all came to be.
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely a viable pathway, and there's some data from the Geological Society in London. I think it was 61% of people who said who were geologists said that the reason they became geologists because they had a lifelong love of the outdoors, and I think that's really important. I think we can use that to understand how we talk to potential future geologists,
Right.
young people who are interested in the discipline. But I also think it's a bit of a worry, of course, because not everybody has access to the outdoors because of like where they grow up, or the socioeconomic conditions in which they grow up. They don't have that ready access, and also being outdoors is a very, it's often quite physical. Being
Yeah.
in the hill range is quite a physical thing. So in terms of people with physical disabilities, that can be a challenge as well. So we need to be mindful that there are other pathways into geology, but mine was very much like running up and down hills because that's the
Right.
sort of kid I
That's what
was.
mom and
And
dad were doing with you. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It was kind of really useful for me. So I think there was that when I was younger, and then I kind of went through school. And I'll be honest, I was never very good at science. I wasn't very interested in science, and I wasn't very good at science. Science was my second worst qualification, my grade, by the way,
Hmm.
when I left school at 16. Um, and so I kind of stumbled into geology when I went to do what we call A levels over here. So at the age of 16 to 18, you can do these 2-year courses, which are in the UK called A levels. And I kind of went in this room, and this guy had like a model, like a dinosaur, and a model of a volcano, and he had some other I think he probably
Props.
had a
Yeah.
globe above the table and some rocks on the table. I was like, oh, what's this about? And he's like, oh, it's geology. I was like, oh, this is kind of like geography. And he said, well, sort of, but it's like the
Right.
physical geography bit. And yeah, that was kind of it for me. I kind of went in there and realized that there was this thing called geology, which would allow me to understand the earth and how it formed and evolved, and make me understand those landscapes I'd seen when I was younger. Um, but it also made me realize that there was a lot of science in geology as well.
Right.
So having kind of sucked at science, I then realized that in geology, there's lots of chemistry, physics,
Yeah.
biology. There's like the underpinnings of planetary development are in the sciences, and so it was kind of a hard landing to kind of go back and realize that after all of that, I'd become a scientist after all.
So you didn't get that first taste of geology as a discipline, in terms of a formal introduction until around 16, 17 or so.
Yeah, really late, really
Yeah.
late. I mean, during pre-16 education, so they're called GCSEs in the UK, we have geography but not many places teach geology as a pre-16 subject. So geology is often encountered within a geography course.
Right.
And then it's largely, I'll be honest, geomorphology. So it's largely about landscapes, rivers,
Yeah.
valleys, ice sheet
Yeah.
dynamics, which are
Physical
really cool.
geography. Yeah. Right.
Physical geography.
Right.
There may be a bit of volcanoes because everybody likes a volcano. Everybody likes the Pacific Ring of Fire and some earthquakes, right?
Right.
But that's as far as it went. And sedimentary metamorphic igneous, the people learn that when they're like 8 years old, like my youngest daughter.
Yeah. Kind of
But like,
superficial. Yeah.
yeah, but like without like bringing those things together, and certainly the bit that's missing from there, and I think this is something which I didn't get when I was younger, is like almost like why geology matters. Like I think when I was younger, it was very much like, well, this is this type of rock, and this is this type of rock, and this is this type of valley, and
Yeah.
but nobody told you why knowing those things was useful and important for things like resources or human safety and habitability of certain locations on the planet. And I think it's not that everything needs to have a purpose, that it's dead important, but certainly I think some people are motivated by having a utility, right, in the
Application.
learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because some people would otherwise, be like, just like me, why would I want to read about Shakespeare when I was younger? I wasn't interested in English literature, but maybe like having learned Shakespeare, I have a broader appreciation of how to read and write and things. But without having that utility given to you, I think some people just me, I'm very much like, I'd like to learn something so I can enjoy it. We'll talk about climbing later on, or
Yeah.
playing the
Yeah.
guitar. These are all things which we don't just do them because we want to. We do them because they bring us joy and they bring us value.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't think we do a good job as a whole of explaining to people that geology has application and what it can do and the problems it can solve. I think a lot of people, like you said, think it's like, rock collecting and identifying rocks, and you're the guy I come to when I want to know what rock I picked up on my travels. And I mean, yeah, it is that. I mean, I even asked my students the first day of class, like, what do you think this class is about? Like, well, we're going to learn about rocks. And like, but yeah. So I think we just as a profession and a discipline, maybe we just haven't done a great job of telling that part of our story, I suppose.
No, we don't. I think, and I understand why, because there's probably some comfort in talking to other people about the thing that you're formally trained in, right? At that level, it's like, curation of rocks and, classification of volcanoes. They're all quite static things, but talking to people about why it matters, sometimes I don't think, we maybe have that learning as on the same par as the identification of different things that we otherwise should. Because I think if you said to somebody, these people's lives are at risk because they live in this certain location, here's a picture of their town, can you sort of have a think about why? And then you saw there were steep slopes, so you saw there was a river that could flood.
Mm-hmm.
That way would be a way of getting into the geology, because the questions being provoked by something which is more immediately of interest, which is, looking after people, or providing those people with clean water, or providing those people with, energy or something, that's of interest, right? And then the geology is sort of somewhere down that pathway, but you can sort of collectively build into that understanding rather than just saying, well, let's just learn about all the different rock types there are on Earth.
Yeah, it's context. It's what I like to call place-based learning. And that's like it's rooting it in what they know. You're in this community, you're in this location, and here's how geology is relevant to you. And I think that's a great place to start when teaching people.
No, exactly. So kind of your original question was like, how did I get into it? We've kind of like my sort of provocation, we kind of, I guess, followed that lead. But yeah, definitely when I was growing up, it wasn't that, there wasn't that initial romanticism you often hear about, I think, for geologists, where it's like, I was always collecting rocks as a child on the beach, or I had dinosaur posters on my wall growing up. I wasn't that kid. I was just sports obsessed, to be brutally honest.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. So then once you obviously kind of tasted the geology Kool-Aid, so to speak, at 16 or so, what happened after that? Tell us about the progression from that point on.
Yeah, so I started doing geology first year of A levels, second year of A levels. I learned there was a thing called university. So I was very unaware. My parents didn't go to university, so I was first generation attend at university. So, and the community I grew up in wasn't academic at all. It was, in terms of academic attainment, it was very low.
Right.
So I stumbled upon the idea of university quite late in my first year and into the beginning of my second year. And that's when you start to apply in the UK for university. And when somebody planted the seed and said, oh, you're doing quite well at your studies and you did well in your GCSEs, you should consider going to university, I found out what it was about. And then I realized you could choose what you did at university. I was in the mind that you had to go there and do, like, I don't know what somebody told you to do.
Yeah.
And that's when I picked geology.
Yeah.
I thought, well, it's the thing that I'll be honest, it's the thing I found easiest of all of my A-levels. It was the one that made most immediate sense to me. And therefore, like most 16-year-olds, the thing I found easiest, I enjoyed.
Right.
So
Yes.
I enjoyed it. And I thought, well, if I'm going to go and do anything for 3 years, I'll go and, do the thing that I enjoy doing and sort of see where it took me. So, yeah, so then I went to the University of Manchester, and did a 3-year degree in geology. And I guess I think that experience was good. I learned about more rocks,
Right.
more science. But I definitely got that, why does geology matter, through that experience. So I definitely, in those lessons, sort of learned about mineral deposits and, ore deposits, and I learned about earthquakes as a hazard, and I learned about rocks as a resource for mining or for like containing fluids and gases. So suddenly, I think geology became a lot richer a discipline for me going to university. But at that point, I still didn't know I wanted to become a professional geologist. Don't get me wrong. I was like, this is kind of cool. I'm just going to hang with my friends and go climbing and, just make another decision.
No, it sounds like the same path I had, where like I just enjoyed what I was learning and I enjoyed the process of learning. And it sounds like you were starting to learn more about the application and how geology worked in the real world. But I didn't have any clue, and maybe you didn't either, like where this was going to end or where this was going to take me, or what was at the finish line, if you will.
No, exactly. And is there ever a finish line, of course? Because I guess my career has suggested there's
Well, it
not.
keeps moving, right? You just keep...
Yeah, it keeps moving. Yeah, exactly. Somebody needs to hold it steady and then I'll eventually win. No, but it's very true that you kind of, when I went into university, and this is what I kind of found slightly confusing about some of the discussions around declining student numbers in geology now, is that, a lot of students know about mining as being this destructive practice and oil and gas and the contribution it's made to climate change. And young people know that, and I'm not denying that, but that can inform their poor opinion,
their decision. Yeah, right.
I didn't have that when I was 16. I was so probably like ignorant to maybe, there's been an increasing awareness of climate change, let's say, in my lifetime. But at that time, I wasn't really that aware of it. So I certainly didn't think the finish line was going to be me becoming a professional geologist in some context, either in academia or outside of academia. I just thought, you went to university, you got smarter in something, and then you got a job at the end of it. And it's the practice of becoming smarter that allowed you to get the job, rather than there's these tangible technical things to do with geology that then you apply. I was honestly, Shawn, I was that daft, really, growing up. I just thought, I'll learn something.
I think we're all naive at that point, just like, at least, I mean, some people are focused, but I certainly was, and it sounds like you too were just like, well, it's the learning and the education and kind of getting through these steps and these classes that was the, the goal. And we really maybe weren't thinking so much about, the discipline and being ingrained in that discipline over a long time.
And I could lay the blame slightly at the door of the institution, in that, although my lectures were kind of telling me a bit about the application of the science, I didn't really have that many careers events, let's say, where, various people who were professional geologists came into our department and sort of talked to us, or things like you're doing these videos, to actually have that awareness of what the future might look like. And to be honest, I'm not sure whether it made any difference to me, because I was just interested in learning about rift basins and normal faults and sedimentology. And I thought it was all great, and being in the hills and collecting samples. And I thought it was all right, super cool and really good fun. but like having some of those seeds planted would have been useful. I think we do a better job in academia now than we did then
Absolutely. Yeah.
around.
I think, yeah,
I
overall it's
think
a better job.
I think it's
Yeah.
better now. So yeah, so I kind of went through that undergraduate degree. Then I did my PhD at the end, because by that point I was like, this is really good fun. I don't really fancy working yet.
Right. So staying in school was the better option, right?
Yeah. And then I just delayed the decision making for
Yeah.
another 3 years.
Living in the fantasy world of grad school is better than the real world.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you have any, in either any part of your kind of university experience, did you have any like mentors or people that were really instrumental in like helping get you to kind of where you were? Like, did you have any kind of those big experiences?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Rob Gawthorpe, who was my PhD supervisor, well-known geologist, worked on rift basins and things. He kind of, so at the end of our second year, we had to go away and do an independent mapping project for 6 weeks, and I went to the Gulf of Corinth rift basin, so in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob was my supervisor, and he came out and we got on really well, like personally. And then, I was really interested in the work that I was doing. And he kind of was like, oh, you're actually quite good at this. I was like, am I? And he said, yeah. Have you ever thought about doing a PhD? So it was almost the twin conversation that I had when I was doing my A-levels, when somebody said, have you ever heard of university? It was like,
Right.
a moment where somebody sort of opens up another option to you that you kind of maybe were vaguely aware that there were PhD students, there were grad students in the building, but you didn't really know what they did.
Yeah.
And so he was the one who encouraged me to apply for that PhD and kind of gave me the confidence to apply for it. Because I thought a PhD was for like super brains.
Yeah, I think those people are so important. Like just someone that believed in you, saw your potential, because you probably you couldn't see that far. You couldn't see beyond yourself maybe a little bit, and someone else was able to like expand your horizons. Yeah.
Exactly, and they can give you an area to channel your sort of interest into, right? So you're interested in, tectonics and sedimentation, but you're not really interested in geochemistry. So then when you're starting to get towards the latter end of your undergraduate degree, you can start to do that focusing. And it was useful that he said, oh, actually, what the things you're really interested in, there is a home for those things in graduate school in this PhD. And that's when I ended up going to the Gulf of Suez for my PhD, working in Egypt for a long time. And Rob, certainly through all of that, was very supportive and of like, all the good things I was doing, but also rightly critical of all the bad things I was doing. In some ways I was quite a wild graduate student, and I think he tolerated quite a lot, and he knew my mum and dad as well, because my mum and dad had come up for graduation and met him in a few different social circumstances. So I think he was kind of partly parenting me from kind of self-destructing, right, and then partly trying to teach me how to do jobs.
So he was life coach and graduate advisor all at once, just
he was
wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah, but he was, I wasn't absolutely awful, but he definitely was. He was the right supervisor for me, and he managed me in the right way. So he was probably one of the people I'd say at that point in my career was really influential. And that even now, like some of the experiences I had with Rob about how I think about geology and how I write about geology and how I talk about geology are still very deeply rooted in his way of doing things.
Yeah.
As traumatic as I found it, because he was a real like English and grammar pedant, and he wrote really beautifully, and I always found it really frustrating that I'd write something and he'd rewrite it, and then I'd look at it and go like, this is 100 times better.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely elements of that I see in myself, like in terms of how I critique myself, but also how I advise other people about those things. So, but I'd like to think they're all positive. I think I'm a better geologist and a better person because I worked with him.
Yeah, it sounds like he was, very instrumental in like shaping your career and your role as a scientist. So how did things progress? So then you got your PhD, and now there's no more schooling, so you can't hide at university any longer. So what happened next? What was sort of the next phase of your career there?
Yeah, I did. You say there's no more schooling. I actually managed to hang on for another 6 months to do
Okay.
some like digital research. But there, you're right. There's no more formal training. So I did a short-term postdoc position, which isn't a qualification. It was just a position. And then I went to Bergen in Norway. So I went to work for a company called Norsk Hydro, who are now called Equinor, one of the world's largest energy company. So I went and worked in their research center. And so I lived in Norway for about 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
working on, at that time, primarily oil and gas exploration and production research projects. So, which was cool, right? Because, you're in Norway, skiing,
Yeah,
hiking,
beautiful
climbing,
country. Yeah.
like, yeah, it suited me personally. But then also, it was kind of neat because I took the things I'd learned in my undergraduate degree and especially my PhD, and then I was applying them in anger to very specific subsurface problems. So whereas things before had perhaps been more theoretical, even during the PhD to some degree, because it was like analog work, what might this mean for the subsurface and
Yeah.
how might you image this thing at 2 kilometers with geophysical data? Suddenly, you're very much at like the sharp end of that
Yeah,
set
like
of
the real
questions that
world and real data sets and real problems. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
people asking a boss asking real questions that you need real answers to, and so you can't like be messing about like I perhaps would have when I was at grad school. So it was,
Right.
it was good.
Yeah, I think that sink or swim moment right out of grad school. I always feel like that first position is the one for me anyway too, and it sounds like you as well. Just you had to figure it out quickly. You had to take that kind of
Yeah,
that theoretical world from university and then like really make it work in the real world.
no, exactly, and it was I really enjoyed it. I mean, there was good people around. I had a very good mentor, two really good mentors there. Tom Dreyer and Paul Spencer. So these were two people who were in the research center who kind of took me under their wing and like, socially made sure I was okay in Norway because it was a big culture shock, very different
Yeah,
um, like way of life, but also, I've been in Manchester and London, and quite racially and ethnically quite diverse places. You go to Norway in
it's kind of
2002,
yeah
and it was
monoculture.
just
Yeah,
monocultural. So
right.
like being a black person there, it was, there was additional challenges with that as well, on top
Yeah,
of like, how do I interpret this seismic line? That was troubling me. So there was like a big mix of things, but they were really helpful at getting me settled and really kind of, I would say, overly trusting me and sort of allowing me to really kind of explore things, right? So they provide me with some projects and some questions and things, but they really were good at, oh, Chris, go and speak to this team over here about this, structural geology problem they have. And I would be like, oh, okay, you're going to come with me. And they're like, no, we're busy doing other things. And
yeah,
suddenly I felt like, we talk about imposter syndrome
yeah,
often in academia and in life in general. And I was very much like, why are these people like trusting some snotty nose, like
right.
21-year-old who, doesn't know anything, or 24-year-old who doesn't know anything to like make a rather large decision on that's going to cost somebody a lot of money if it's wrong.
Yeah,
But like,
yeah. I mean, I had similar experience where I worked for a groundwater company, and I didn't even have any hydrogeology experience, and then I'm in this company. I had a boss just like yours. It sounds like where he gave me a lot of rope, and I kind of wish he would have
yes,
coddled me a little more. Like, hey, can you hold my hand a little more? But he didn't.
yeah,
And then he's like,
yeah,
you got to figure out where they're going to drill the well, and they're going to put their money where your mouth is, kind of thing. And
yeah,
at the time, I remember just kind of like almost, you know, I didn't like it, and I think I was, not. I didn't feel like he was
nervous.
nurturing me as much as he should. I'm like, this guy's a terrible mentor. But I look back now, I'm like, he did me a favor because I had
Yeah,
to
yeah,
figure it out. And I don't know if you feel the same
yeah.
way about those years as well.
Exactly. And everybody's different, right? Everybody needs a different way of being interacted with, right, by somebody else, and how two personalities align
Right.
varies, and they can all those different versions can be successful. But yeah, it kind of worked for me. I think that you know I felt empowered without being big-headed, but I also felt kind of exposed enough that I took it seriously. So I think that initial position was good. And then I was there for about 3 years, and eventually I moved back into academia. So that was my first Well, that was my second pivot, I guess. Originally in
Yeah.
academia, out to this company for 3 years, and then after 3 years, back into academia. Yeah.
Did you know that you wanted to go into academia all along and like just wanted to get a little real world experience, or were these just
No,
kind of okay?
absolutely, absolutely 110% no intention of becoming an academic.
Yeah.
So I came back to the UK because for personal reasons, and my intention was to get an industry position back in the UK. There was an oil price downturn, there wasn't many positions available, but I had managed to meet somebody at Imperial College who was in North Kedro visiting, and they needed somebody to cover a maternity leave for them.
Yeah.
So I came back and just had a 1 year contract at Imperial College just to cover some teaching and basin analysis.
Right.
And I was like, I'll do this, and then I will join this year. I'll be applying for jobs with different companies, and I'll get a job. And I applied for a couple of jobs, didn't get them. And then I applied for a couple of postdocs and didn't get them either. And I was like, okay, this isn't great.
Right. Yeah.
At this point, Chris's indecision was coming back to bite him on the ass. And so I just eventually ended up like kind of settling in at Imperial and then doing quite a good job. And they just offered me a contract. So, I went from a 1 year contract then to an extension for a year on that contract. But actually within like the first year, they offered me a permanent contract because I'd sort of I did the things they wanted me to do.
Yeah.
So
it turned into something more long term. Yeah.
Yeah, so then I was just trapped for 17 years. I often joke, like it's kind of weird because you say like everybody's like, oh, did you want to become an academic? Like, not at all. I didn't know really what it was. It wasn't like somebody who'd done lots of postdoctoral positions. So often, you'll do your graduate school, your PhD, and then you'll do maybe a number of postdoctoral positions before then getting your first tenure track position in the US,
right?
And then eventually achieving tenure, right? So you often have like that sizable bit in the middle of the postdoctoral experience. And because I went into industry and then came back, I didn't have that experience. Then I looked out with the first position because there's no way anybody would hire me now. Like faced with like one paper, no money. Now it's a complete arms race for full-time tenure track positions. I was just incredibly lucky, and I'm more than happy to admit that. And it led me into a 17-year career, which I absolutely, loved for the most part. It was, I learned a lot, but it wasn't by intent.
Yeah. Happenstance. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you enjoy the teaching, and did you have any sort of teaching? Like I was able to in grad school, they had a teaching assistantship that helps cover part of your, you teach a little bit for the department, and that helps fund your stay during those grad years. Did you have something like that where you're able to taste the teaching life a little bit?
No, not really. Okay. In the UK, it's different that your PhD is fully funded, so you don't rely on that TA position for the stipend. You can get extra money from doing that TA work, but it's not the main scholarship.
Yeah.
So it's slightly different. So I did get a bit of experience teaching, like in the classroom and doing field teaching. I did quite a lot of, but I would never say that it influenced me one way or another when I eventually went into being a full-time academic myself. I'd sort of, I wouldn't say I'd forgotten about what the experience was like, but it was certainly, I had to learn a lot about how to educate master's level students about, structural geology and sedimentology. It was all very, very new.
Yeah. That's a hard thing to be thrown into, teaching, however many classes in a year and prepping those classes and figuring what's going to work. And it
was even worse as well though, because like, it wasn't, I kind of turned up, it sounds good on the face of it, but I turned up and they were like, literally, here's the course, here's all the slides. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. And then I looked through and I was like, I don't really understand any of this.
Right. Someone else's, it's got to fit you, right? It has to fit the way you would teach. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was kind of like a bit of like fiery start where I had to go in and sort of like relearn some concepts that I'd not learnt before. And
Mm-hmm.
the joke is you always need to just be one page ahead of the students, right?
Yes,
That's the
it's true. It's so true.
so you like kind of like
Yeah.
asking you
At least
questions.
that first year, and then you come back the second year, okay, I've done this, and you
Oh,
tweak some
take
things. I know
things.
what worked, I know what didn't work, and then it gets easier each year. It's supposed to anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So it was, yeah. So those 17 years, I kind of taught primarily one or two or three different courses to different year groups, but largely to the master's program in petroleum geoscience. So I had a
Mm-hmm.
very kind of well-defined teaching like allocation. I felt very comfortable with the material. I updated things. So that eventually I kind of evolved them to being my sort of materials. So I think that bit of the experience of teaching, I certainly now I'm outside of academia, when I do like outreach and engagement things, I think that was quite formative, actually thinking about how do you take quite complex concepts and communicate them in a way that somebody else will understand them without diminishing,
Yeah.
the accuracy of the science, but without then over egging it, like how do you do that?
Yeah. So how did you go? So you're teaching, graduate students. So you're at a very technical, deep level with the material. But then you mentioned that you started doing more like public and kind of outreach type of things. So how did that evolve? And was it a struggle for you? Because I think the system we're all in is a system in which we train students to learn the fancy words, write papers, present at conferences, speak to your colleagues, but then taking all this knowledge you've gained and what you know and bringing it back to the general public. I think the way the system's set up, it doesn't always teach students and young people in the discipline to do that well. So was that a struggle for
Yeah.
you? And maybe talk a little bit about that progression.
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of came about by chance again, where somebody kind of, I'd never done anything for about 7 years, like in terms of public speaking. When after that first joined that first academic position, and then somebody asked me to go and give like an outreach talk in a pub, actually in the pub in
Right.
London, like
Yeah.
it's called Pints of Science. Can you come and talk to the public about some bit of geology? So I went and did it, and I was really nervous because it did make me think, like, how do I take this complicated thing and take it down to the level of the public, or not to the level of the public? Let me just rephrase that because that sounds condescending. But how do you communicate it to somebody who doesn't have that formal
Yes.
educational
Yeah.
background you have in that bit of the
Yeah.
discipline?
Technical material for a non-technical audience. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of, and because I'm inherently stupid, number one, and because my PhD supervisor once told me, whenever you give a talk to somebody, even if it's at a conference or to like non-technical people, they always should leave that talk feeling smarter than they were when they arrived. You bear those two things in mind. It left me with the option of just like, okay, make this simple enough that a younger version of yourself would understand it. And that's really hard because you're trying to shed 10, 15 years of formal training and all
Right.
the
The system.
all the
Yeah.
all the terminology and everything, and you're trying to remove that and try to get to the essence of the subject is one challenge. The other thing is, I think you use the term place-based learning, where then like, how do I route this talk? And the talk, by the way, the first talk I ever gave was about salt,
Oh.
was about halite,
Yeah.
sodium chloride. And I was into salt tectonics, but like, who cares and knows about salt tectonics? So I need to get the audience to think about salt.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, did you know there's a rock you can lick?
Yeah.
And then you sort of like base it from there, and then you take them through, and then you show them a pan with some salt water, and you boil it off, and you leave the salt layer, and you're like, this rock is dissolved, and then you kind of lead people through, and
Yeah.
then at the end of it, you show them some like horribly complicated seismic
Yeah.
profile with a big salt structure.
Here's a salt diapir, and yeah,
Here's a
like
salt diver sucking up people.
yeah.
But what you do is you kind of give them that journey, so that there can be a bit of wow and awe, and at the end of the talk, where
Mm-hmm.
they maybe don't understand what a salt diaper is and about like the mechanics of salt flow, but like, that's not the point. The point is, this rock, which you can lick and you put on your food, can flow like a kind
Yeah.
of toffee, and it can build structures which are as tall as like Everest.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you
It can
leave the talk
deform
knowing.
rocks. Yeah. It can cause rocks to
And
fold and move. Yeah. Crazy.
exactly. And so it's really, that was what I really had to work on in that initial sort of engagement, was how do I how do I tell that story? And I think, then with subsequent things where I did some TV shows, it was similar there, where, you're trying to like take that complex story or that complex narrative. And the Earth is hard, of course, right? The Earth is very old, 4.5 billion years.
Mm-hmm.
It's very big, several thousands of kilometers in diameter. It's no surprise that non-technical people, like, why would you believe me when I tell you that I can tell you that 8 kilometers below my feet, there's a rock which was deposited in a lake?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
the UK was at the equator, it just sounds like you're making.
Well, it's so abstract, right? It's hard. It's not rooted in what they know in their reality. So I think you did the right thing by connecting what they know about salt, and you started there, and then you work from there. I mean, you've got all the makings of a great communicator. You've got your humility. You don't take yourself too seriously, and then. So did you enjoy those experiences? Did you get like a lot of times?
Terrified. No, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. It was absolutely awful because this like thing, there's a tension on both ends of that, right? One is, have I made it understandable and interesting to this non-technical audience?
Yeah.
Or do they just think this is some like boring geologist stood up and just bored me with loads of wrong words and told me about rocks and I don't care, right? So there's that. And then at the other end, there's all your like geeky mates who are like, oh, but you went and talked to these people in a really simple way.
Yeah.
And you might have like missed this thing out, or you might have got that tiny thing wrong here
Yeah.
from the latest research. And so that occupying that space in between can be, I don't mind it, somebody has to do it, whatever, I'm happy to get things wrong and get them right in the future. But like, that's certainly something you bear in mind, that you don't want to get it wrong. And so it was and remains challenging because, like you say, like people often say like, oh, you do science communication a lot, but I'm a geologist. I've never had any formal training in science communication. I've learned through error.
It's trial and error for sure.
I've kind of done it a few times. I have read, books about how to communicate to people, and I've watched YouTube videos and tried to, and then even now I give talks and sometimes I get them wrong. I realize the narrative was back to front, or there are times, and even now, where you kind of, literally and metaphorically fluff your lines. you get it wrong, but yeah, it's important to do it, to try and, going back to what we've started talking about, is to make the public aware and make other people aware of the importance of our discipline. You've got to give them an access point to our subjects.
Yeah, and you got to meet them where they are, and like start with something they have, like with context. But I'd like to think that you've, like when I do these types of things, I mean, I'd like to think that you're getting a little bit of what I call the kind of the warm fuzzies, like people appreciate it, and really you're speaking to that audience. And so what your colleagues think, and if you missed a little technical thing, I mean, that to me, that's like that's not who I'm speaking to. That's not the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I won't swear, but yeah, I don't mind. I don't pay any mind to those people.
Right.
But yeah, I think it is amazing. Like this, I think somebody asked me this question earlier this year. They said, oh, like, what's one of the best sort of experiences you've ever had as a geologist? And, one of them is like working with graduate students and seeing them really, happy and graduating, going on to great things, and being appreciative of the time you spent with them is number one. And number two is like giving a talk to a non-technical audience, and somebody like children or, older people coming up to you afterwards and saying, oh, thank you for spending your time here at this school, or because you've told me this, I really, I'm really interested in geology now, or I didn't understand that, just those like small, like that whole thing where they came to the talk and they left feeling inspired, or they watched a TV show and at the end of it, they knew more than when they started watching it. That's like really great. That's like a human,
it's a connection. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's the stuff that gets me excited, because a lot of times, like I'll be invited to a third grade class, and will you come bring them some rocks or talk about this? Like, okay, and I'm always dragging my feet, like, oh, this is interrupting my day, and I'm not going to get this done. But when I'm there, and it's the third graders, or it's a room full of older people, or whatever the audience is, immediately it's like, this is awesome, and why would I not want to do this? And this is a great chance to explain the mysteries and the cool things about the Earth to people. And I get so psyched about that.
No, exactly. It is really. I mean, it's really exciting. I mean, the kind of the only like negative side of it, I think, from my experience in academia, I don't know what yours is like, and even to some extent in the private industry, it's like it's not valued enough. Like
Yeah.
what's valued is like really, writing papers, raising money, qualifying,
Yeah.
graduating students, and so on.
No, it's almost looked at as a waste of time, I think, in the tenure
Yes.
track elite
Yes.
university, which is the wrong is the wrong.
It's
I
it's
think
seen as
it's
a waste.
yeah,
It's seen as a waste of time, and it's also seen as being easy.
right. It's the lazy
So a
thing
lot of
to
people are
do.
like, I could do this if I wanted to because it's not that hard. You're just talking to third graders. Like, how
Yeah.
difficult can it be?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, if you've ever like parented a third grader, you'll realize that
Yeah.
those third graders.
Right.
You-
Well, and I think we need people doing both, right? We all can't do
yeah,
everything, and we do need some professionals that are communicating effectively with the public, and we need other people that are in their
doing
research
yeah,
bunkers, like just writing papers in mass and doing students and just living that life. But ideally,
yeah,
we're all kind of doing a little bit of everything and and spreading it out, I suppose.
yeah. I think yeah. So I've definitely had this conversation with people before where um, I'm kind of hesitant. I'm hesitant to endorse the idea that people should be able to get away without talking about what they're doing. I think for a couple of reasons. One is if it's taxpayers' money, you have like in the UK, a lot of research is taxpayer funded. Therefore, you have a responsibility to
Yeah.
communicate that back to the government and ultimately to the taxpayers. I think partly whether it's through the medium of a paper or a talk or whatever, I think there's got to be. I would like to think there's some ways in which those things build a pantheon of knowledge and actually sort of influence positively the society in which that research is done.
Yeah.
I also think it's easy for some people to say, well, I'm just not very good at this. And I mean, my argument, I'm not very good at science communication, therefore I'm not going to do it. And it's often coded with, I can't be bothered because, nobody values it,
Yeah.
is my experience, I'll be honest. And I think it's like anything, some of those things can be learned. So I just don't 100% buy into the idea that there's some natural born science communicators and there's some people who absolutely aren't, because I know people on both sides of that who have worked really hard to improve the practice of how they communicate science. I know
Yeah.
some people who found it really hard but still engaged because they realized that. And remember as well, science communication is not like TV shows and podcasts and it's going into third grade classrooms. It's talking to your friends in a cafe. Oh, what did you do this week at work? Oh, well, I did this. That's science communication, right?
Yeah.
That is, whether it's with one person or 10,000 people, all of those little interactions are a mode of science communication. So I don't think we should ever, some of those people who are in the research bunkers, to some degree, they probably are still communicating science to a non-technical audience at some point in their life outside
Right.
of their bunker. So I'm really a big cheerleader for just valuing all of those different, in different scales of interactions using different mediums.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah, you've got to be able to, it just like anything, it takes practice. If you're going to get better at something, you have to,
Yeah.
and like, I certainly couldn't be doing what I'm doing now with YouTube stuff 15 years ago because I think I needed to go to the Rotary Club and the third grade classrooms. I think all those things kind of led up to, me being
Yeah.
able to do bigger things. And I think it's a scaffolding. It's you sort of like work your way up to
Exactly.
different levels.
Yeah, I think as well that, because I think part of like if people say, it's just people are born with it, I think it devalues, like I say, science communicators who are like professional science communicators, because it's like super hard to do what they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've been trying to do it and it's like really hard. And when you see somebody do it really well, it is like magic, it is incredible when you get somebody to break something down which is really complicated in a really engaging way. And so I do think that those people need a huge amount of credit for the role they play in publicizing science as a
Yeah.
not just geoscience but science as a collective endeavor and the impact it has, the positive impact it has on the public.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm going to give you some praise here so you can be as humble as you want. But I've seen some of your like TED Talks and stuff, and I think you're incredibly a gifted communicator, and you're able to tell stories and connect with people. So,
I can't tell. I can't. I'm always so nervous. And
well,
then,
you're very polished, and as someone who's trying to
okay,
do that, I'm doing the same thing, but I have you and other people I kind of see as like, wow, like if I could, like they speak so eloquently, or they've got this great flow, and so there's always people
yeah.
we can look up to. So I think you're doing a great job
Oh,
in that
thank you.
role. So
I'll keep trying. But it's kind of, yeah, it is. It is nice to hear because it is like very like. I mean, when you teach, I don't know what your experience has been, but I always find like teaching and communicating quite an emotional thing. Like I'm normally emotionally drained. If I ever did like a day-long class where I was interacting with the students, we were doing things on the board, we were doing, map
yeah, it's
exercises.
exhausting. Yeah,
When I got home, I was just like wet
spent.
towel on the head.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was like more tiring than climbing to the top of a hill to get a rock sample. I felt,
right.
that act of like thinking really deeply whilst you're talking to somebody to make sure your message gets across, and
Well, that just means you're doing it right. You're putting your whole,
probably,
your whole
yeah,
soul into it, which is the way it works. That's the way we're going to connect with
yeah,
people and teach people. So I think that's
yeah,
great.
exactly.
Well, let's talk
Yeah.
a little bit. Let's we'll give you some of the. We'll wrap this up here in the next few minutes if that sounds good. But I do want to talk about climbing because we emailed back and forth, and I knew you had that connection. And so talk to me a little bit about how you got into climbing, and I mean, let's talk as
I'm living all
climbers
this.
for a minute now.
Yeah, I'm living all the stereotypes, aren't I? As a climbing geologist who
Yeah,
liked the outdoors when they were younger. I mean, it's
right.
like,
Yeah, you and
so
I are
I
the
didn't
only
climb at
ones like
all.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't climb at all growing up. And then when I was doing my PhD in my first year, one of my lab mates was a climber, and he said, "Oh, do you want to go climbing?" So I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll go climbing." And then from the first time I went climbing, so around where I live here in Manchester, there's loads of really good rock climbing on different rock types. So we went out climbing, and I just really liked it. Um, so I kind of like got into it more and more, and I think what I really enjoyed about it was, there was like a social aspect of being with one person or a group of people. So that was really nice. Number two, you were outdoors. I just like being outdoors
Yeah.
and exploring and finding new places and finding new experiences in old places. So I'd go to places where I'd walked when I was little, and I'd go back there to climb some like single or two pitch routes, so quite big routes. But when you're like 10, 20 meters up on a rock face, you've kind of been to that place before, but you've not been to that place before,
Right.
that position high up on that rock face. And that kind of more like spiritual exploration I really like. But then I also really like the physical
Mm-hmm.
and the mental bit of climbing, which is about, the physical bit is like, pulling hard sometimes on routes and
Right.
having enough like strength to sustain a series of like hard moves through a route. But there's also the mental bit where, can I do this more efficiently? How do I place this protection? Because in the UK, I'm really into trad climbing, so I don't do sport climbing. Trad climbing is where you place your own, for the people who don't
Yeah.
know, but it's where you place your own protection in the rock face. So I was really into, being a bit of a gear head. I like the wires and the cams and all the nerdy
Right.
things, and spending money on things I couldn't afford. So I think it was that, like, it was just this really it was just the sweet spot between all of those things. And then the geology is cool, right? Because you like climbing on rocks that are like got like cool crossbeds and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. People often ask me like, oh, as a geologist, did you get into climbing because of geology or vice versa? And I've always found that interesting to talk to other geologists. Like, does your knowledge of geology, does that enhance the climbing experience? And for me, it's kind of like, well, sometimes, but sometimes I'm just focused on like,
Not dying.
putting my hand on that hold and making sure I don't fall. And like, it doesn't matter what
Yeah,
rock I'm on, but sometimes it definitely does. It can be advantageous because I might be like, oh, there's a fossil, or I know like,
yeah,
oh, that fracture has like some patina, like some iron oxide on it. And so that's going to be a good edge or something like that.
for jamming or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah. So I
yeah.
think it
I
helps a
think
little
it's
bit.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I do think about it when I'm there and I'm kind of looking around at the landscape. So I'm still like in my natural environment, so to speak. And
Yeah.
yeah, I do. And I think the grades are interesting as well. It's like anything in your life where you want to get better, whether it's like academic, well, your like exams, or it's, you know, I play the guitar and I've been practicing playing the guitar, trying to get better at that, or climbing. And, you know, there's grades and you can try and do things that are more or less difficult depending on how you feel. Sometimes I don't want to practice a really hard song because I just find it frustrating. So I'm just going to strum like 3 chords and sing along.
Right,
You know?
yeah.
So you can sort of pick like the experience that suits your physical and mental mood. And I, you know, and I think having just generally things in life like that, you know, I don't want to read a challenging book. I want to read an easy book, or I don't want to watch the news because it's so
You can
thoroughly
kind of pick your
depressing.
flavor for the day, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you can, and climbing, I feel is just one of those. It's one of those things. So for me, it's mentally really important.
Right. So do you, it sounds like you climb regularly, like maybe, you know, a couple times a week or whatever. Are you like doing expedition climbing, like traveling to climb, or you're fine just kind of climbing in your local crags there?
Just climbing the local crags really
Yeah.
once a week. So we just go out to what do you call it? Pennsylvanian. So we call it Carboniferous.
Yes.
So Pennsylvanian gritstone is
Yeah.
my
Like a
is the
sandstone.
rock,
Yeah.
which is sandstone around here. So Pennsylvanian sandstones are like the main rocks, which are say like 20 minutes drive from my house here.
Okay.
And then you can go to slate, you know, so there's all the metamorphosed mudstones in North Wales. North Wales famous for slate. There's also ignimbrites and all these volcanic rocks that you can climb on in North Wales and in the Lake District up in Cumbria. Yeah, so the geology, you know, the more I think about it, the more the geology, like and the different styles of climbing very much relate to the type of geology, of
Yes.
course, right?
Yes. Yes.
So the ignimbrites are these, you know, we have these like welded tuffs as well. So the welded tuffs are these like crystalline, hard, compact rocks. There's no cracks really in them. There's just lots of tiny edges
Yeah.
from, you know, these like big crystals. So it's all very fingery and delicate foot moves. But then
Friction
you go to
climbing. Yeah.
lots of friction on the slabs and the slate.
Right.
And then you go to the gritstone, there's like cross beds and there's cracks from like where the blocks have fallen away. And so the geology very much dictates the type of climbing, and the regions dictate the type of climbing because the geology is so region specific.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
intrigued. If I'm ever in the UK, maybe we can go climbing together because
Oh, happily.
I'm intrigued by
Happily
that
to.
climbing because reading the climbing magazines growing up and stuff, everything I read about UK climbing sounded terrifying. Like long runouts, like 2 crappy nuts in like 20
That's it.
meters. And
That's
I'm
it.
like, so
Yeah.
in my brain, I'm just like, when you say you're mainly a trad climber, I'm like, oh, and you're in some quarry where the rocks, like, you know, it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
even like,
Loose.
it's not even natural in the sense that, you know, like this face was man-made and maybe it's ready to fall. And I don't know,
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
uh,
100%. That's basically that's like. But if you grow, if that's what you start with, like everything else seems great
well,
afterwards.
yeah, exactly. If you can grow up climbing UK like trad
Correct.
climbing, you go anywhere else, you're like, this is so much easier. Like I can
Yeah,
put pro in all the way up the route, and the rock's competent, and
yeah, it's bolted to death. I'm just like, this is like
yeah,
being at the climbing wall, you know. So
yeah, and yeah, like
yeah,
I still do trad climbing a little bit, but we have a lot of sport climbs around here, so you know, when I'm just climbing locally, it's just easy to clip bolts, but we do get
yeah,
out.
yeah.
We
Well,
just
you're
did a
more than welcome.
Yeah, well, that
Yeah.
sounds good. So, yeah, that's interesting. Well, to kind of wrap this up, Chris, and I appreciate your time. Maybe last question, maybe just like your kind of last, or your, I suppose, like advice you would give for anyone interested in geology, young or old, just lessons you've learned in your life, just kind of a big takeaway you might want to just impart to folks watching this.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to learn about geology, or to be aware of, is that it really, really matters for, you know, a safe and prosperous society. It's not simply, you know, the collection of things and the cataloging of things and the measuring of things. It's people's, you know, it's people being able to, you know, turn the lights on. It's people being able to have clean drinking water. It's such a fundamental subject in terms of, you know, people's well-being and welfare. I can't really overstate it. I can put it on the same level really as being, you know, working in the medical profession.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you're not in A&E saving lives, you know, on the front line, but you are continuously in the background providing a prosperous, you know, helping develop a prosperous society. So I think having that kind of knowledge and then going in to find why geology matters is one thing I'd like your listeners to take away, is it's not to say, I'm important, or, it's just that geology and geologists are really important. And that's, I think that's one thing we often fail to recognize.
Yeah, no, I think it's understated across the board. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the message I think we're all trying to share a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Chris. This has been wonderful. Maybe we can circle back in, a month or a year, a couple months or a year or whatever. And I'd love to talk to you more about like, rift basins and maybe get into more technical things. But this has been
Oh yeah, happy to always talk about
yeah, a
that.
great chance to talk more, just kind of learn more about your career, kind of how you got along this path. So we appreciate your time and thank you so much.
No problem at all. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.